I now introduce the book of Zephaniah, a prophet who saw the day of the Lord in Babylon's invasion of 586 and in the end times day of the Lord. Introduction. Author is Zephaniah. He is said to be a descendant of Hezekiah, which is probably a reference to King Hezekiah. It says in Zephaniah 1:1, the word of the Lord came to Zephaniah, the son of Cushi, the son of Gedaliah, the son of Amariah, the son of Hezekiah, in the days of Josiah, son of Ammon. Now, this Hezekiah is probably King Hezekiah, who was king over Judah from around 729 to the early 600s BC, one of the good kings of Judah. He is also said to be the son of Cushi. Again, the son of Cushi, and this also is a interesting term because Cush is normally a term for Ethiopian, or more precisely Nubian, a country directly south of ancient Egypt. And so Cushi, at least in terms of the form of the word, would seem to mean Ethiopian. And so one wonders if perhaps Cushi had a Ethiopian mother through some sort of marriage alliance into the royal family. Well, the date of this book is to the reign of Josiah, as again the first verse mentions. This is in the days of Josiah, the son of Ammon, the king of Judah. And his reign was from 640 to 609. So it's at least in that time period. The issue is, how does this book relate to Josiah's discovery of the law of the Lord in 621 BC? Some scholars believe that this was written before that law of the Lord was discovered. Others think it was after the law of the Lord was discovered. I lean to before, but I'm not at all dogmatic on that particular issue. But somewhere around that time, it would seem to be perhaps before this time, because it talks about abuses that Josiah worked to try to eradicate. And so before 621 seems best to me. And what is the circumstances? Well, it's a time period where there's no fear of God. It says, I will punish the men who say in their hearts, the Lord will not do good or evil. God doesn't do anything. He just ignores people. And therefore they don't fear God when they do evil. There's pride and disrespect for the temple. In that day I will remove from your midst your proud, exalting ones, and you will never again be haughty on my holy mountain. So they are showing disrespect for God's holy mountain, the temple. They are practicing fraud and getting ill-gotten gain. Speaks in chapter 1 and verse 9 of people who fill the house of their Lord with violence and deceit. There's idolatry, worshiping Baal and the planetary deities. I will cut off the remnant of Baal from this place, the names of the idolatrous priests along with the priests, and those who bow down on the housetops to the hosts of heaven, and those who bow down and swear to the Lord, and yet swear by Milcom, which is an Ammonite deity. There was corrupt civil and religious leaders, chapter 3, verses 3 and 4, Her princes within her are roaring lions. Her judges are wolves at evening. They leave nothing for the morning. Her prophets are reckless, treacherous men. Her priests have profaned the sanctuary. They have done violence to the law. So the theme of the book is this. Chapter 1, the day of the Lord on Judah in 586 for their various sins. Chapter 2 broadens to judgment to the nations. And chapter 3 then is judgment. The judgment broadens to more of an eschatological theme, which looks like we're talking about end times. Or to give it an outline, the day of the Lord against Judah in chapter 1 and bleeding into chapter 2. Judgment against the nations, Philistines, Moab, Ammon, Cush, and Assyria, the rest of chapter 2. Judgment against Jerusalem, first 8 verses of chapter 3. And then the day of joy beyond judgment, chapter 3, 8 through 20. It begins with a sweeping statement. I will completely remove all things from the face of the earth, declares the Lord. I will remove man and beast. I will remove birds of the sky and the fish of the sea and the ruins along with the wicked. I will cut off man from the face of the earth, declares the Lord. So I will stretch out my hand against Judah and against all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and I will cut off the remnant of Baal from this place and the names of the idolatrous priests along with the priests in it. And those who bow down on the housetops to the host of heaven, and those who bow down and swear to the Lord and yet swear by Milcom, and those who have turned back from following the Lord, and those who have not sought the Lord or inquired of him. It's very universal language. We're going to remove all things from the face of the earth, but this appears to be hyperbole. The judgment is going to be specifically on Judah. And it's fulfilled by the Babylonian invasions, first in 598, and then again in 586, when Jerusalem was destroyed. Zephaniah 1:14 through 16 uses the language of the day of the Lord for this. Near is the great day of the Lord, near and coming very quickly. Listen, the day of the Lord. In it the warrior cries out bitterly. A day of wrath is that day, a day of trouble and distress, a day of destruction and desolation, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness, a day of trumpet and battle cry against the fortified cities and the high corner towers. Here we have Day of the Lord, and we talked about that in the book of Joel. There are some temporal days of the Lord. There's some that are eschatological. This one's a temporal one, having to do with the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem in 586. But then Zephaniah says, gather yourselves together, yes, gather, O nation, without shame, before the decree takes effect. The day passes like chaff, before the burning anger of the Lord comes upon you, before the day of the Lord's anger is upon you. Seek the Lord, all you humble of the earth who have carried out his ordinances. Seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you will be hidden in the day of the Lord's anger. So this day of the Lord is coming, but it's used as a call to repentance. There's no guarantee here. But perhaps you will be hidden in the day of the Lord's anger. A call to repentance, and it's not unconditional, but it does supply some hope, even though terrible things are coming. There may be a word play on Zephaniah's name. Zephaniah's name means the Lord has hidden or treasured. And here it says, perhaps you will be hidden in the day of the Lord's anger. How appropriate for the prophet whose name means the Lord has hidden, speaks of being hidden in the day of God's anger. Now, I'm not going to say much about the oracles against the various nations in chapter 2, other than to point out that he has one little verse about the Cushites. You also, O Cushites, shall be slain by my sword. And this is significant because, as we were talking about earlier, it appears that Habakkuk has a Cushite relative in his ancestry. He also talks about the Cushites again in chapter 3. Chapter 3 and verse 9, For then I will give to the peoples purified lips, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord to serve him shoulder to shoulder. From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, that's Cush, my worshippers, my dispersed ones, will bring my offerings. And that day you will feel no shame because of all your deeds by which you have rebelled against me. For then I will remove from your midst your proud exalting ones, and you will never again be haughty on my holy mountain. But I will leave among you a humble and lowly people, and they will take refuge in the name of the Lord. Now, in this section, another hope beyond the gloom section, there is hope for the future. And in that future is going to involve not only Israel, but also the nations. Then I will give to the peoples, notice the plural, purified lips, that all of them may serve the Lord, to serve him shoulder to shoulder. So with God's people, the Jewish people, there will also be other ethnic groups involved. And indeed, he brings back Cush from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, literally Cush. My worshippers will bring my offerings. And so the Gentiles are going to be brought in. And so this is a promise of the Messianic age, that beyond the current age, God's plan is going to spread, involving Gentiles being purified, being true worshipers of God. Now, this is clearly fulfilled in the church age, in which the gospel has gone out to Gentiles. And as a result of this, God is going to bless Israel. Israel is going to have joy and restoration. Sing aloud, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O Israel. Rejoice and exult with all your heart, O daughter of Jerusalem. The Lord has taken away the judgments against you. He has cleared away your enemies. The King of Israel, the Lord, is in your midst, and you shall never fear evil. On that day it shall be said to Jerusalem, Fear not, O Zion. Let your hand not grow weak. The Lord is in your midst, a mighty one who will save. He will rejoice over you with gladness. He will quiet you by his love. He will exalt over you with loud singing, and so on and so forth. So in sum, this book is about judgment on Judah for its various sins during the time of Zephaniah, which is seen as God's visitation and judgment, or the day of the Lord. But then there's a day beyond that, a day where Gentiles will be brought in, and that clearly begins at the church age, when the gospel goes out to the Gentiles. And even now we do have Christians in Ethiopia. And beyond that, the ultimate blessing that God promises his people, the ultimate blessing coming at the end of the age with the second coming of Christ. So that's an introduction to the book of Zephaniah.